Hello, I'm Andy Schmuckler, and I'm here today to do something I've never done that feels kind of embarrassing to do, which is just to, uh, without any kind of plan, just share with people as if they're interested in what I'm going through at the moment, and as if they're interested in the various things that are bigger than me that I'm thinking about. Uh, it would be easy to do that if I thought, oh, I've got a following. I watch guys on like the sports TV shows where they're discussing, whether this quarterback or that coach should be fired. Yeah, they seem to be completely comfortable, just sort of riffing on whatever they do, but they've got a schedule. I've seen like talk radio jocks who uh, uh, get paid to be entertaining or something, just being themselves in some way or other in front of the microphone for a few hours a day. Uh, I've done a lot of talk radio, but I don't do it that way. I don't feel comfortable that I've got that kind of a relationship, that people are interested in just seeing me be me, because entertaining is not what I've striven to be. I go on the radio, and I've got a topic framed, and then call-ins, and people discuss it, and it's all done in where I'm in a particular role. And that corresponds to what I've been doing on YouTube also, which is I've got a topic, and I may speak improvisationally about it without any kind of plan. It's spontaneous in that way, but I go on there with a point to make, and with the sense that I'm justified in asking for your attention because I've got something true and important to say. But this is a different day. I'm just sort of titling myself, partly because I think it'd be therapeutic for me. I'm under an unusual amount of stress suddenly, and it feels like if I can assume that somebody's interested in this, I can do something that would be good for me and of interest to other people. Should I say what my stresses are? Well, first of all, we're just out of propane. In the coldest period that I can remember here in the mountains near on the western flank of the Shenandoah Valley where I live, we got 9 inches of snow. The propane people can't deliver because of the snow, they say. I'm out of propane going into this time, and I'm dealing with this company, AmeriGas. It's just become such an abomination. It's really strange. Just one thing. I'm supposed to be on automatic delivery for propane. I know that. For a while, I wondered, well, maybe when I bought my tanks, they clicked the wrong thing and took me off of. But I didn't get a single delivery until in all of 2024, part of 2023, all of 2024, and into this Siberian Express that's on its way. And there's been no delivery in all that time. And I've been trying for 2 weeks to get a delivery, but of course it snowed, which I said on Thursday it's going to do, but they waited a few days, and by the time they were going to do it, helping me in an emergency. Anyway, AmeriGas, it deserves whatever damage I just did to it, which I kind of regret, because they used to have a local office and a girl that answered the phone in Mount Jackson, Virginia, and she was always a pleasure to deal with, and everything got done right. And now, the times I've spent on the phone with a call center in India, where they give me assurance. Yes, I can promise you you're going to have a delivery. Of course, they can't promise anything in New Delhi about what they're going to do here. Anyway, that's one stress out of propane. I think we're going to be okay. We've checked out the baseboard heat that we got with this place. We never use because electricity is very expensive. So I'm not gonna die of cold here. And my wife April keeps a fire in the fireplace, but it's going to go below zero. They're saying at the moment, not much below. I'm a Minnesota boy, and I'm used to, well, not used to, but I mean, I've lived that life of well below zero. But people in Minnesota are housed in places that will keep them warm, and no propane. Another thing is happened to my website. My big thing that I'm continually trying to do is to convey a better human story. And my website is abetterhumanstory.org. And I've been stressing all week about something that's happened to the site for reasons that somehow I never got renewal notices, so I didn't pay to recertify my site. I had no idea that there was any such thing to do. There's been a passing of the baton regarding the care of my site. And this got fumbled, apparently, and it's a big mess. I really want to be able to direct people to abetterhumanstory.org because I claim that I'm able to show something of real importance. And now I don't feel like, I can say, and check me out at abetterhumanstory.org because you're going to come up with a screen that tells you something about certification and might be unsafe. Well, it isn't unsafe. And there's a thing down there that says advance. And if you want to get to my site, which would gratify me greatly, you just click that advance and it takes you to the site. I mean, I can still post things on it. It's just that it's become cumbersome. And the thing that I most wanted to be pushing out into the world that embodies a life's work that I think could actually help human civilization survive, it's just suddenly taken away from me, and I feel helpless. I've been on the phone more than once. I won't tell you all the stuff I've been trying to do, but I haven't succeeded, and it's not clear exactly how I'm going to succeed. I'm not at home with these 21st century things anyhow. So there's that. I hate feeling helpless. I'm not a guy who can do everything. I can't build my own house, but I basically am not a guy who is on the spectrum toward helpless. And I hate that feeling. So there's that. I went to the dermatologist yesterday. I'm closer to 79 now than I am to 78. And the whole issue of getting older looms large in our lives. We're thinking we've made a decision that we're going to move to a retirement home, though we're still in perfectly good shape to live this life, even as rugged as it is these days with no propane and practically, nearly a foot of snow. I mean, we were able to shovel out a space for our son to park and shovel out a place where it's helped the postal delivery person who had slid down into a bit of a ditch. But numbers are numbers. And there's a lot about getting older. I don't know who my audience is. Are you of my age, like baby boomers? Are you at an age where maybe the things that have to do with being old are kept at arm's length? I really don't know, but it is a reality. And having lots of friends that are dealing with stuff that's serious, having to confront the mathematical possibility that's our wedding picture back there, April and I. We really mean a lot to each other. And the idea that you might have to, one of you will live a life after the two of us are no longer a couple because one of us has died. So I went to a dermatologist anyway yesterday, and usually they find something on me. I'm fair-skinned. There wasn't a lot of sunscreen in my life when I was playing sandlot baseball with my shirt off. Not being always mindful of sunburn issues. And so I go in there, and every year I get zapped one or two places. And okay, it's, they don't like the looks of it in a precancerous kind of a way. But yesterday, there was a little something that I'm going to have to go back to have checked. And from what the dermatologist said, the word cancer has just been applied to me for the first time in my life. It's really a nothing thing, basal cell, something or other. Apparently it's, it's not like melanoma or anything like that. But still, I got to go back, and things are going to be done. And it's just a reminder, as if one needed a reminder, that the human life goes through a trajectory. There was the boy and the young man and the middle-aged man, and now still pretty continuous with the middle-aged man. But it ain't going to go on forever. I mean, you get to see what happens as the numbers go up. Sometimes it's not so bad, but sometimes it isn't pretty. So you face that. It's not as far away as it used to be. And I've never been very good at really processing my own finitude. I mean, I've known that, the human life is finite and you die. But I haven't really believed that it would apply to me at some level. I still don't entirely. I watch movies a lot. I watch old movies a lot. It's part of how I get out of this world for a while and get into some other world. Now we'll talk about that other stressor, which is Donald Trump's about to become president again, and all that entails. I mean, that's a stressor that it's really been heavy to carry this defeat that happened November 5th. It was so huge an event. I mean, the human story was in some respects on a tipping point. Kamala Harris wins. We will have political power, the power of the state being used for constructive purposes. May not always be the smartest, but its intention is generally constructive. We'll have a politics in which the truth matters. Politicians spin, but Joe Biden and Barack Obama were so much further in the direction of speaking truthfully than their Republican opponents. And that this liar, what's the word? Prodigious liar that they've elected president. I mean, I could go on and on about all the important forces that would have been decided more to strengthen the constructive at the expense of the destructive. And yet the American people decided. They decided to go with what was so clearly the path of destructiveness that even if Trump weren't going to get all the power in a few days, we'd have to look at the ugly fact that the American people chose this thing. What the American electorate now is 100 and whatever million American adults, of whom roughly half can take a look at what Trump was displaying, has been displaying, and what Kamala Harris was displaying. The contrast couldn't have been sharper, and the American people, roughly half, even if Kamala Harris had won, we'd still have to wonder what happened to the American people. So that is a stressor that's just been weighing on me, something fierce. I've been writing things about this. You know, things about like, why was it possible for Donald Trump to actually defeat the rule of law? Looking at the state of play as it seemed to be like a year and a half ago, the indictments are coming down. Could one have readily imagined that we'd now be in a position where he basically skates a couple of minor judgments, but he's got a get out of jail free card. He can kill the cases. He's basically not going to be held accountable. Could anybody have believed that the America, if you grew up in the America of the 40s, 50s, 60s, even Nixon's America, could you have believed that he could beat the rule of law in that whole situation with whatever it was, 93 and then 88 indictments? So anyway, that's a stressor. And that's why I don't want to, that's why I have a need for some kind of a freedom to talk about whatever it is that might be talked about. And I'll pretend that I've got the kind of following that, some of these guys got, where they know that there's a lot of people who want to hear what they say. So anyway, to turn to one of the things I've been thinking about that's personal is the meaning of life. No, I mean it more specific than that. Well, I wrote recently about the good, and that the good has to be, it only can come into existence when there are creatures that are experiencing things in terms of better and worse. Because if there's nothing whatsoever that's experiencing one thing one way and another thing another way in terms of what they prefer, then you can't talk at all about anything being better than anything else, about there being any kind of good. But once you've got creatures that do feel that way, then the meaning of the good emerges when you've got with creatures evolving who have that kind of experience, and that's the only possible basis for talking about the good. So if you want to know what should we do, it's always got to be about having creatures feeling good. So in our own personal lives, the pursuit of happiness, but also as a general definition of the good, it would be making the world of experience as on a completely widespread basis, as much feeling good as possible. So selfishly, I want to feel good. I do pursue happiness. But then there are different ways of defining, well, what is it that would give you happiness? But at the same time, if I want to be aligned with the good, I also have to think about, well, as I'm pursuing happiness, what impact am I having on whether the human world is thriving, whether the biosphere with all the other creatures is thriving? Am I serving the good, or am I just serving my good? And so I think about, well, who do I really care about? And, obviously I care about me. That's easy. And there are people I care a lot about, though I'm not hugely impressed with how unselfish I am, even in those relationships. I often, I can be counted on to always be decent in those relationships. But I've seen people who are much more into loving and serving, the way my relationship with April is. But anyway, I don't impress myself as much in that respect. But I do care, and I do take care of people. But then when you get outside that circle, family and meaningful friends, I do care about sort of the abstract. I do care about that the people be treated justly. Like I don't like seeing that the Russian people are pummeled. If they dare to express their feelings against the ugly war that Putin launched. I put myself in their place. But, it generally has to do with my passion for justice rather than my compassion. When people like a hurricane comes through North Carolina, and there are a lot of people whose lives are thrown into, and the California wildfires. I have some feeling for people in all that respects, but it's not my forte. I don't have the impetus to jump in a pickup truck and deliver lumber or something like that. I appreciate that. And when I hear about the way some people in America have gotten a lot of people have gotten the shaft over the last half century. I think it's got to do with, you look at the Powell memo from the early 70s, and you look at what the Republican Party has become. I think that there has been an advance of a plutocratic power. It's also a fascistic power. And that it's basically given a lot of people a feeling of grievance, and it's cultivated that grievance and misdirected it. So they feel very victimized, but they are being sold a bill of goods by the very forces victimizing them. I lost my way. We've got I'll turn to talk about my family culture and what it would mean to me about feeling good. I watched the way my family culture, shaped me to be who I am, which is, it's got its pluses and its minuses. One of the challenges of what my family culture is the extent to which it made achievement the route to feeling good. partly through making it the route to feeling loved and appreciated. There was a lot of reward for achievement. Um, and I got such mixed feelings about that because it's been really a pretty good trip for me, since since the beginning, to be so motivated to try to, really accomplish something. But at the same time, the taskmaster that's involved with that is, I think of a line from Alan Watts about you can't get enough of what you don't really need. And so there's what you don't really need. Well, take for example, greed. I mean, we see in America these days, we see such a manifestation of greed. The spirit of greed has become so powerful in this country, in recent times. And in a capitalist society, there's never been any shortage of greed having a certain amount of power. I mean, you could go back to the 19th century and the way the newly industrializing robber baron powers were, essentially buying control of the Supreme Court and the Republican pro-corporatist government. But I think that there's something deeper at a spiritual level that's going on with the greed of today, with Elon Musk and the tech bro guys and the crypto guys and the cabinet of billionaires that Trump's assembling. One thing one asks, and if you have the least bit of spiritual grounding about greed, is that really the path to happiness? I mean, if you've got billions of dollars, like the Koch brothers did, like Elon Musk does, who have done so much damage to the world and to American society because they were greedy to get even more. Now, what the hell does that mean? What kind of human spirit is on display when the richest man in the world seems, I'm talking about Elon Musk at the moment, seems to be motivated to manipulate things to get himself more? That's not the spirit you would want to have exercising power in your society. Now, how is it that the Trump supporters are okay with all this greed? I mean, the Christian evangelicals, what do they think Jesus was saying when he said you can't serve both God and mammon? My original book there, The Parable of the Tribes, The Problem of Power and Social Evolution, which has the foundational idea of this better human story about what's happened to our species. That idea has to do with, I lost my way again. Hate when that happens. Got a situation in America where the state of consciousness of the people is extraordinary in terms of American history. I'm asserting, I can't prove it, that back in the 1980s, conservative America would never have gone along with any of this. So a transformation took place. And we've got a body politic which is in so many ways flawed, um, weak, that the forces that might serve the good have become so incapable of defending the good. And my Better Human story that I wish I could easily make available to you shows how that is. I have a piece that I was writing. I do think I'm going to be publishing this because the fact that Donald Trump got elected after everything that he had so blatantly displayed, including being obviously an insurrectionist, being the first American presidential loser, the very first and only loser to refuse to accept defeat. What made it possible for Donald Trump to commit the most serious crimes in American history and not be held accountable? And in this piece, I go through how that one fact exposes a systemic not rightness, like like there's a disease of the liver or a disease of the kidney, not the same diseases, but there's disease in every one of the components of what should have made that impossible. And I need to work on that piece some more, but let me just, quick. First of all, you can just look at the Republicans in the Senate as an index of what the Republican Party had become. That in two different impeachments, the overwhelming majority of Republican senators violated the oath they took in becoming jurors in an impeachment trial and simply served the lawless. So how did that happen? I don't believe that anything like that would have happened to the Republican Party. I knew the party of Thomas Dewey, Dwight Eisenhower, even Ronald Reagan. There had been a change over time of the Republican Party from the party that would have fairly normal relationships with the Constitution and the rule of law into a party that no longer is interested in playing by the rules, that's simply driven by a lust for power and an insistence on conflict over cooperation. My Better Human story is able to use what you can show about this Republican Party to illustrate what the existence of something you could call a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world more broken or make the human world worse. And then I say, that is a good definition of evil, and that is my definition of evil. And I think we can show in this Better Human story of mine, I claim that I can show that there is an important reality in the human world that can be described as a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse. That I can show the existence of that. And there are two ways of doing it. One is to look at something that is so consistently acting that way visibly that you can infer that whatever it is that's governing this thing, today's Republican Party, for example, it must be a coherent force because it's so non-random. They're always choosing the worst path to take, always the most damaging thing, whatever issue it is: climate change, the rule of law, truthfulness, race relations. No matter what you look at, they're always on the wrong side, and that, okay, you can show it that way. And there are some. I've worked with a couple of other such coherent forces, like the slave power and the Nazi regime in Germany leading up to and during World War II. I've studied these three. And I've studied what's happened to the Republican Party, and it comes to a very revealing climax when you got the most impeachable president you can imagine. I mean, if Trump wasn't impeachable from the very outset, it's hard to imagine what a president would look like that was impeachable. I think he quickly outstripped Nixon. Actually, in spring of 2017, I actually demonstrated in front of the offices of Bob Goodlatte, who was the head of the House Judiciary Committee, and to whom I had actually lost the election in this very red area for Congress in 2012. So it gave me a standing to get up there on a public stump. I was happy to read that. I'd forgotten that I'd played that kind of a public role back then to call attention to Trump's impeachability. But anyway, the Republican Party that sent a delegation led by Barry Goldwater to tell Dick Nixon, you better get out of here. That same Republican Party had, by the time Trump, actually, I would say by the end of 2017, the Republican Party was already completely servile to this highly impeachable president. So that's it. We wouldn't have this problem of having lost the presidency to Trump and the Trumpian force on the right if the senators from the Republican Party hadn't been so morally bankrupt. That's one kind of deterioration in the American body politic, that Trump's getting away with this. So ugly, so ugly. So appalling that it should be possible for him to do what he's done and get away with it. I would have, if you'd asked me to bet, I mean, I was dismissive when he announced his candidacy for presidency. I was dismissive of the possibility that he actually could win. I thought that he would probably get the Republican nomination, and that he would be like a time bomb going off, destroying the Republican Party by leading them over into the abyss, because the American people would have seen what an abomination this guy is, that he tried to overthrow the American government. That for the first time in our history, a presidential loser, rather than conceding this defeat, tried to spark an insurrection that would lead to his getting power against the will of the American people. What does it mean for him to be able to get away with that? Well, the Republican Party didn't care about things like that. They acquitted him twice. The cases were both abundantly proved. That first impeachment, I think, should have been for a whole raft of crimes, and they just focused on that Ukrainian extortion effort to get illegal help that is illegal to get according to American election law from a foreign power. A lie upon a crime, and they acquitted him. A bankrupt party, a party whose bankruptcy I first started trying to call attention to it when Limbaugh and Gingrich became the dominant voices of the party. Without this, I never would have understood the reality of evil like I feel that I do. I've had to watch something taking over the right, and I've asked myself, what what is that? What is it that's happening here that explains this darkening thing that's sort of getting more and more powerful when you look across the American landscape and you see that in place of people like Everett Dirksen, the Senate Majority Leader for the Republicans back in Eisenhower's time, you got somebody like Tom DeLay, who's a thug. I mean, thugs started rising in the Republican Party a long time before Trump. And thugs were welcome. They were given leadership positions. And con men, like Newt Gingrich, were become. I mean, politics has always got a lot to do with the con. I mean, it goes through American history. Melville's book, The Confidence Man, Mark Twain's Confidence Men. It's part of a democracy that there are going to be people who try to get power by conning the people. You can fool some of the people, all the people some of the time. That's part of what the politics of a democracy inevitably are. But this got to be at a whole different level. Trump is certainly part con man. Gingrich is a con man. Eisenhower wasn't a con man. I wouldn't call Reagan a con man. He was just somebody who put a sunny face over some quite largely valid things, and to disregard the darkness that went along with the things he supported. But he was basically a man of goodwill, not Newt Gingrich, not Donald Trump. Something dark took over the Republican Party. And I once did a piece called Rogues Gallery. I don't think I ever published it because I don't feel like I ever quite brought it up. But if you look at the various characters that the Republican Party is, the face of the Republican Party, starting with Gingrich, or Time magazine in the early 90s had Rush Limbaugh on its cover, I think it was Time, saying, could he be the next Republican nominee, meaning in 96? Good people. It was a rogues gallery. And Karl Rove is indicative not of thuggishness. Rove is just a sociopath. And sociopathy has been so abundant in the Republican Party. They have weeded out all the people who are not sociopathic or not willing to play along with sociopathy because of their own selfishness. I mean, Liz Cheney ain't in the party anymore. Neither is Adam Kinzinger. These are people who believed in something. That change in the Republican Party, no small thing. And that contributed to how Trump got away with it. So what else? Well, we could leap ahead, just I don't know what order to do these things in, but the Supreme Court. There has been a battle going on what kind of people with what kind of people are going to sit on the bench on the Supreme Court, and the Republicans made a transition. I don't know a lot about this, but when Nixon appointed a Warren Burger, I don't think he was appointing a sociopath. I think that Warren Burger was a conservative that Nixon could pretty well count on to take a conservative slant on things. But not being a sociopath, when he takes an oath to apply the law and the Constitution, there will be a fundamental kind of integrity that there's a limit to how much he's willing to bend things in the conservative direction. Not to such an extent that it makes a mockery of what he's supposedly there to serve. I could be wrong about him, but I don't think I'm wrong about the people who are on the court now. This isn't just a conservative court. This is a corrupt, fascistic court. They're not interested in the rule of law. A conservative court would be. And this immunity decision that got, the way the Supreme Court delayed things, first of all, that by itself was plenty enough to show you that in this confrontation of huge historical importance between Donald Trump, the criminal, and the rule of law, the Supreme Court, for reasons we can discuss or conjecture about, but clearly the Supreme Court came down on the side of the criminal who had committed the most serious crimes in American history. And they handed down a decision which, believe me, I think that I'm qualified to say does not pass constitutional, what's the word? Metal. Hey, it don't work as an argument. It is so clearly contrary to the spirit and letter of the Constitution that a president should be able to tell the Justice Department to commit some crimes, and the president is immune from being held criminally responsible for having given that order to the Justice Department. It makes no sense. Doesn't fit with what our founders clearly were trying to do. No one is above the law is the fundamental principle here. The power of the state is subject to a higher power, which is why they take an oath of office. I've got a piece that's coming out in tomorrow's Northern Virginia Daily about that Trump shouldn't be allowed to take the oath of office. I say he already took it. He already violated it. What can it mean other than allowing him to make a mockery of it? Yeah, you got to let him be president because he won a free election. The American people made a choice. The American people have a right to make a foolish, ugly, dangerous choice, but they have a right to make a choice. If we believe in democracy, but if we believe that the oath of office must mean something, we can't let him take it, as he's already shown it doesn't mean a thing to him. I like that argument. I have a contact. I freely admit to being pretty much of a nobody. But there's one way in which I'm potentially not a nobody these days, not just this voice of the wilderness. I have the ear of somebody who wants me to provide ideas for what he might do that would be useful in the battle to save American democracy. And I've sent him a whole variety of ideas and succeeded in having some of them passed into still higher hands. So that's the one place. I think it's the only place. Well, it's a niche probably as good as I've ever had because this person is an important voice in America. I would like it to be a more important voice because I am afraid that we're not right now about to fight this battle the way it needs to be fought. I think the weakness of liberal society is still so great that there isn't the kind of moral and spiritual passion that the times call for to fight the fight that needs to be fought, because what we're up against is something that calls for those kinds of passions. It is a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse. And the Trump presidency represents that across the board. And that can be shown. You don't have to use the word evil. But we should call attention to the fact that this guy has shown contempt for the oath of office, because it fully represents his contempt for the Constitution. It represents his complete lack of honor. He bears an oath. He puts his hand on the Bible and he says, "So help me God." What's going on with those people in conservative America? That it would be okay with them for a guy to take that oath and then break it. You know, that book, I think I was going to say a long time ago, it explained why the human world is so broken. And it goes back to a particular point in the evolutionary process where we step onto the path of civilization. I say that's where the riddle of evil gets solved. That's what I say. That's the same place I lost my way before, and which is interesting in itself. Where we are as a species has to do with an inevitable byproduct of our becoming the first creatures on this planet to start inventing our own way of life. That looks like a breakthrough into freedom, and in many ways it was. We developed culture in a whole lot of different directions, but of all those directions, only some would survive, and the ones that survived would not be the ones that people would have chosen. They're chosen by a systemic dynamic. Anyway, that's what I saw in 1970, and it makes so many things clear, including the emergence of things like the coherent force that we're up against, where the power of the forces of destructiveness had become so great, and the power of the forces that make things more whole had become so weak, that we could have an election between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris and end up with this ugly, fascistic force taking over the presidency. A guy who would nominate a Putin apologist to be director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. It's a different America. We made such a fundamental choice. And what we're up against, and that's the title of that book back there, 2015, before Trump, what we're up against is something that is so dangerous for everything that we value. All the things that are good are damaged the more that kind of force is able to dictate what happens in the world. I want to go back to the personal because I remember something where I was getting to you about greed. I talked about my own form of greed is achievement. The family culture encouraged the idea that you want to feel good, perform in some impressive way. And so I worked very hard to perform well. But there is a sense in which there was a substitution of that for love, just like Trump's niece thinks his greed is sort of a function of the family culture where there are certain kinds of things that money meant love or something like that, she says, in the family culture. In my family, achievement was, in that direction of being loved, more than is healthy for a person. So I wrestled with that, well, a whole lot. I won't go into my biography much. I mean, I do have to hold your interest, but I always was trying to escape what I considered my slave driver, my taskmaster. It didn't make me feel good to have such a driving need for achievement. Over the years, I learned to come to pretty good terms with the taskmaster eventually, and I get such pleasure from whenever I feel like I've performed well, and whenever I get some appreciation for the performance, that matters. But I also am able to feel good about what I'm doing while I'm doing it. Now, I wrote that piece I referred to where I said, the good has to be defined in terms of people. Creatures that feel good or not good feel good, that we each have that selfish need to feel good, which is legitimate to pursue. And, my desire to perform impressively could have been, when I was a kid, it could have been satisfied with anything it didn't matter of whether it was of any greater value other than it got me the applause. I mean, I had fantasies of being a great athlete and, professional at football, basketball, and baseball, all of which I loved to play. It was only later that I found out that I wasn't going to be at that level with any of those sports. I'll play high school ball, but I won't be good enough for college. So, okay. That isn't going to be the performance that continues to impress and get me the applause. When I was had just graduated from college, and I had sort of satisfied my need for achievement because of the way I got my degree, and because my dad had affirmed my achievement so fully when I was 21 and just graduating. And then he died, which broke my heart, but I was sort of freed from, he was the one that had to sign off on the quality of the performance. But I dropped out for various reasons of my ambitious path of becoming a social thinker. I dropped out because of what was happening in the world and what was happening in my life. Dropped out in '68 and threw myself into the McCarthy campaign to end the war in Vietnam. Then try to learn how to live a life that was meaningful, where I wasn't enslaved by my taskmaster. I had a voice in my head also from my dad when he was when we both knew that he was dying. He said to me with great emotion, and he wasn't generally one to express great emotion, that I must live for him, that his life was being cut short. He was only 48. But he implored me to to live fully. I told him about a dream I'd had about it. It was basically implied that I would follow him in death. It had a black carriage drawn by black horses, and him dressed in black coming to get me. And he said, "Live for me." It was a very meaningful moment. My dad, who was probably the introjected taskmaster, my dad worked very hard too, because he also, I think, felt that achievement was what would make a person okay. He wanted me to live for him, and I experienced myself as not being very well equipped for living fully because of some excesses in my taskmaster, the need to achieve and to justify my existence by having accomplished something good every day. So I wrestled with that issue when I was living by myself in a little apartment in Berkeley. How to live fully when I wasn't on the path of ambition. A graduate school dropout is what I was. How to live fully. Work out a relationship with the taskmaster that frees me from some kind of slavery that I've incorporated from my family culture. And I think that, well, the first solution ended up being, after half a year, that I redefined work. I defined going out into the day and living a meaningful day as my work. And that redefinition of work went a long way to making me a freer human being at that point. And I had a concept of follow your energy. And that was the approach I took to life, and still take, actually, come to think of it. Follow my energy, meaning, is this feeling meaningful? And as soon as something stops feeling meaningful, then stop doing it. Ask yourself, what is it I feel like doing now? And tune in. Not to the taskmaster. The task is to know what would be meaningful to do right now. And that led to a sort of a rebirth. I felt that there was a part of me that felt completely discontinuous with the guy who'd gone to college. When I thought about that life and that guy, even though it had only been, 3 or 4 years since then, as I was living the life as a countercultural social thinker in the wider Bay Area of California, with its redwood trees and eucalyptus hillsides. Then there came a moment when another part of my family culture kicked in. And it became meaningful to follow the taskmaster because I had a calling. And the calling connected with the part of my family culture which had to do with the responsibility to making the world better in some way. playing a constructive role in the larger picture, caring about other people, caring about justice, caring that the good should triumph over the evil. That was that was just as deeply conveyed by my mom and dad as this achievement business. The achievement business was this mixed blessing and curse. The sense of caring about the world was, I guess it was also a mixed blessing in a way, because it sensitized one to the pain of the world. I kind of wonder where does that come from in some people and not in others. My wife is highly tuned in on the pain of the world. When I met her, she had just been national chairman of a movement to stop the MX missile from being installed as part of the escalation of the arms race out of fear that we're heading toward nuclear war. Now she's a climate activist. She's been concerned about, I don't know where all that comes from, but she just cares about where the world goes. She's also really good about caring about a neighbor who's sick and maybe could use a casserole or something like that. She's at that level a much better person than I am. But I've always cared also about my sense of what it is I wanted to achieve. Went to some deep values. I wanted to be spiritually meaningful. That was before I understood how broken the world was. That was what I was hoping to do in my achievement, which was, interpret like what Joseph Campbell did, but me being a more theoretical guy, mapping out human symbols and myths and using them as a key into the whole realm of human meanings. That's where I was heading before the world fell apart around me. And I felt called to do something about, well, why is the world so broken? And that led to that foundational idea about what happened to our species and why the world is so broken. And once I had that, I was not only obeying that taskmaster guy that was such a problem for me, I was also serving out of love of the world. That something it was in terms of the good being feeling good and the whole picture of feeling good. I get to feel good because I'm doing something that I think is worthy, and it is geared toward accomplishing something good in the world. And I have felt since that moment when I saw that thing about what happened to a civilization creating species, I have felt always that if we actually incorporated that insight into our way of understanding ourselves and our world, it would take us a big step forward, because other things follow from that, including that we are better creatures than we have imagined ourselves to be. I think that idea, which I claim that I can prove with that idea by itself would help us achieve better in this battle between the forces of wholeness and the forces of brokenness, between good and evil, because evil just won a big victory. Why did Trump, the criminal, defeat the rule of law in a way that I think would have astonished previous generations of Americans. And part of it's got to do with Trump having some extraordinary abilities to just fight and fight and fight and never admit defeat. But mostly it's got to do with the immune system of America being so compromised, so weakened. The public that whatever's wrong with all those people. And liberal America was so weak. It didn't recognize what was coming along, didn't fight this thing before it became so powerful. I wrote back in the 1980s that the Democrats had to take a very different approach to this whole question of who's going to sit on the Supreme Court. That there's a one-sided battle going on. The Republicans are fighting to win. The Democrats are fighting by rules that the Republicans aren't respecting. It was supposed to be character, integrity, and outstanding legal competence, and it suddenly became very much our guy, ideologically, and increasingly wedded to a plutocratic. The Democrats never fought a battle that was raging that led to the immunity decision, which is part of why Trump is not going to be in jail. A decent Supreme Court would have had Trump being tried January 2024. He would have ended up being disqualified from the presidency. He would have ended up being sentenced to jail at some point. He could have appealed and appealed, but it would have happened. But the Supreme Court sat on that thing completely unnecessarily and then handed down an unconstitutional decision. The Democrats never fought the way they're supposed to fight. I have this big point about what Obama should have done when Mitch McConnell was stealing a Supreme Court seat by, refusing to let Obama play his constitutional role. I would have fought that thing tooth and nail. I would have taken it to the Supreme Court. I would have made a huge public issue of these guys are cheating. Obama, love him, but man, he sure didn't know how to fight. He was a typical liberal non-fighter. These guys were coming at him like they were his enemies. And he was still acting in the old liberal friends across the aisle way. What's with liberal America? Something had happened to liberal America. I don't know exactly when. I mean, certainly wasn't, liberal America wasn't such, well, what's the right word to use in a, wusses when FDR was president. And they were by the time, I think that Clinton's problem was he simply didn't have the moral authority to denounce what the Republican Party was becoming. You needed a guy who had a voice of people would hear as a voice of righteousness. So Clinton didn't do it much. They got clobbered for one lie after another, Vince Foster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you can't get them on Whitewater, then, here we got that blue dress. I mean, it was despicable. And Clinton did not fight against it, didn't denounce it. And I don't know if he was in a position to be able to. And then Obama, they decided to make him a failure. That's their top priority. And he keeps trying to reach across the aisle. Man, how many times you got to reach across the aisle before you get the picture? So liberal America continued to be too weak, even during the Trump years. And we got to the Trump years because that thing, the Republican Party, that part of the Republican Party was getting rewarded rather than punished for bad behavior. You could just, and I did map, particularly like in 2009 when Obama was trying to get the health insurance passed, that his way of acting actually strengthened the Republicans who had no interest in working with him, and cut the feet from under those Republicans who seemed like maybe they would work with him. Something had happened at the level of feeling or level of understanding in liberal America that made them incapable of seeing what was going on and incapable of responding to it appropriately. And I've been writing about that. Well, a little bit in the 90s about liberal America, where liberal gatekeepers would say to me, Rush Limbaugh's audience is not our concern. Well, we can see now that audience, the 20 million ditto heads and all the other people sort of surrounding that core of people being led into a very toxic place. They were legitimately our concern. We could lose our democracy if you let that kind of poisoning of people's minds go on uncontested. I was trying to become a bigger bird in the talk radio world. They said Limbaugh was the Godzilla of talk radio. I didn't have aspirations that high, but I really wanted to create a very different kind of conversation that would keep the connection between the liberal and the conservative sides of America. That was my purpose in having these conversations, was called a meeting of minds, and that bridges could be built and that we could have constructive conversations, and both sides have a piece of the truth. So let's see if we can work through a spirit of inquiry to see what that higher wisdom is, in which these two half-truths are both recognized and are integrated together. That was my concept of what to do. That was my concept of the Not Rush Limbaugh show. So I tried to get a big stage to do my thing to combat the toxicity of Rush Limbaugh. I didn't get to be a very big bird. I did have a meaningful role. I had to tell myself, given my ambitions, and I'm always swinging for the fences. It's really kind of foolish the way I am, but I was always. I told myself. My mom was a theater person. She used to say, "There are no small parts. There are only small actors." And I went I went 80 some percent toward being able to say, okay, Rush Limbaugh is doing this in this whole country of 300 million whatever people, and I'm reaching this, big for the biggest AM station in the Shenandoah Valley. But it's, I'm a big picture guy, and so I'm very aware that I'm just doing a little bit again when something with real punch is required. Being on the radio with these people, I got to know conservative America in a way that I feel that there aren't other columnists or talk radio people or who are liberal who had the kind of ringside seat that I've had to the transformation of conservative America that's taken place. I heard these people talk about their values, and I have no doubt about their sincerity. And I also, in many respects, got to see that these values were not just something they paid lip service to, but that they were sincerely living by them. There was some beauty. There was some human beauty around some real conservative values, Christian values, of patriotic values of revering the Constitution, and the values of good character, the way one is put together, being at the heart of one's understanding of human goodness. Those things got conveyed to me, and I feel confident that they were valid. But something's happened to conservative America, which I've been watching and trying to understand, where while that's who they were, at least in part, it was possible to get them to where they have embraced in the political realm something which is clearly the opposite of all those values. I won't go into. I'm working on a piece. Well, I've written a piece about how that can happen psychologically. I mean, I've been straining to understand this phenomenon that these good people have embraced something that pretty much characterizes what I call evil, a coherent force, et cetera, et cetera. So we got some thoughts about that having to do with that there's some evidence that we actually can become more than one person in some sense, in various sense, at various levels. And maybe there's some kind of that kind of thing that the propagandists on the right were able to do to train the conservatives of an era that would never have embraced Trump, to change them over the course of whatever number of years it is, 30 couple anyway, so that by the time you get to the election of 2024, those people are in a frame of mind where the ugliness, the contempt for the Constitution, the opposite of Christian values, the complete lack of decent character that gets shown does not trigger any of the thoughts and feelings and evaluations of the rest of the psyche. When they go to church, all those things are looked at through one prism, and all those things are regarded as unacceptable, and they live in accordance with something like love thy neighbor as thyself, at least some. Whereas Donald Trump, have you ever seen a more thoroughly selfish human being? Have you ever seen a human being who manifested so openly, so extremely, so many human defects that we ever care about? Liar, bully, fraud, tyrant. Complete disregard of truth, complete selfishness. So we have had a breakdown of some kind, whether I've got a handle on some of it or not. We know, I think, that something has happened in that part of the American body politic that made it possible for Trump, well, just for one thing, Trump to commit all those crimes pretty much right in front of our eyes, and then to win a presidential election. So that's surely a weakening of the immune system. The American people was supposed to be people who would take seriously certain kinds of values. And particularly the people who used to respond to 4th of July speeches in the town square about all these values that Trump is so obviously damaging all the time. Especially those people you would expect to be completely turned off by a man who assaults the Constitution like this. But something got weakened in that immune system. So we got the Republican Party has been changed. The Republican base has been changed. Who the Republicans have put on the Supreme Court have made it an accomplice to a criminal rather than a means of bringing a criminal to justice. And the liberal America made itself incapable of seeing or fighting against this rising fascistic destructive force the way it needed to. And he let things get to this point. Now, I think that Kamala Harris did a really fine job. I thought it was really good enough. I thought if the American people were shown this stark contrast, and Trump cooperated, in that last month he became uglier and uglier. He was showing the American people what the choice made. He wasn't covering it up. He had that Nazi rally in Madison Square Garden. He went on and on about immigrants eating pets long after it became obvious that this was just a lie. He became ugly. Then at the Madison Square Garden thing, the whole thing about garbage in Puerto Rico, it got ugly. The way he talked about his opponent, that's ugly. Everything was ugly. There was no sense of any kind of positive direction that things might go. His leadership was all about the ugly. And Kamala Harris showed joy and the beautiful. A way forward. Inclusion rather than division. Constructiveness. What we can accomplish together. American values. The rule of law. The contrast couldn't have been better. And if the American people had been who I thought they were, that would have been enough. And I thought they were, therefore I thought what she was doing was plenty good enough. But evidently it wasn't. I tend to be optimistic. Well, let's put it this way. I'm not sure how to put it. I'm worried about the worst happening. I'm not an optimist that denies the possibility that, for example, human civilization is going to destroy itself. And I wasn't. I said for years that American democracy is endangered. So I'm pretty good at being a Chicken Little, but I'm also an optimist in that I'm always looking to that there's a way forward where things are going to get a lot better. It's become harder to see that way forward after this thing. This election was so massive in its consequences that it's a huge stressor. That's weakened me as I trudge through my life. But I do enjoy creating things, and everything I create makes me feel good if I feel like I've done something that might help us to get justice instead of injustice, and to get goodwill instead of hatred, and for all those dichotomies. So I basically am okay with the taskmaster now, but I went through a lot over a lot of years, because you can't get enough of what you don't really need. Anything that gets substituted for love is, I think, going to have a problematic aspect. I'm not greedy, which is why I've pretty much given myself away as much as I could my whole life in terms of money. But what I've been pursuing is making the contribution where I can. And sometimes that's been little piddly things. Well, not, like I just went through, we're planning to go to a retirement community when something opens up. So I'm going through papers and I went through a whole lot of op-eds from the 80s some, but mostly the 90s, and in the Christian Science Monitor and the Baltimore Sun and the San Francisco Chronicle about things having to do with, I found out that I was talking about climate change back in the 90s. And I was talking about the need to use the end of the Cold War to create a better order in human civilization, so that the scourge of the reign of power, REIGN, can be overcome, because that book says that just because we were creative and intelligent enough to sort of extricate ourselves from the niche in which we evolved biologically, it therefore plunged ourselves into an unprecedented situation that has inevitable consequences that turn out to be rather problematic. That power is going to rule. The ways of power are going to inevitably dominate how the civilization of that creature evolves. I claim that I can prove that in the parable of the tribes, and on that website of mine that you can't as easily get to because of such a problem. Anyhow, caught up in something that I said we're better creatures than here's the demonstration of it. Any creature on any planet would if it stepped onto that path, would enter into a systemic situation, this new kind of life, the civilizing society, emerging from an order that had evolved in a biological process. And that discontinuity creating a whole new situation, which actually tends to generate a selective process that drives how that civilization will evolve. And the direction in which that civilization will evolve will involve chronic warfare. It will involve social orders that are shaped by essentially gangsters, the tyrants that rise to the top in a situation of a war of all against all. It's just inevitable. So, if a creature takes that step, so many generations down the line, I don't know how many generations would be on some other planet, but certainly within 5,000 years on this planet, the face of human civilization is really quite ugly. People would not have chosen that. The free hunter-gatherers that we had 10, 12,000 years ago, given a choice of how would you like to get to this place where the Pharaoh has emerged in Egypt and these emperors have emerged in the Tigris Euphrates and so on. How would you like to be a member of one of those societies? They would not have said yes. So if it isn't what people would have chosen, and that's what that book shows. It's a result of a selective process that equates to the reign of power. And if our species, it doesn't have its nature shown by what's happened over the last 10 or 12,000 years, because that was inevitable, then we shouldn't assume that we have a clear view about what we are. And in particular, you can say that the face of the gangster is subpar among human potentialities. If the spirit of the gangster is going to call the shots, the world is going to look worse than human nature itself. That's what I can't claim to know how much worse, but I think a lot worse. And I think it's good for us to know we're capable of better. But only if we bring these things under control, which is why I keep on trying to get this stuff out there. My need for achievement combines with a sense that, okay, well, as it happens, I actually, and I don't mean to be immodest, I actually have applied myself rather fully, with a wholehearted, full-minded attempt to come up with a picture of where we are as a species that actually might help us make the world a more whole place. And that is good, because a more whole place is a place where life is thriving, where the creatures that feel better or worse are feeling better than worse. I mean, look at what force of fascism. What are the experiential consequences going to be of a Trump presidency? Well, I've just started a piece that says I've never felt so unsure about where our country's heading. So I don't know where we're heading. But one of the possibilities is to look at a variety of clues that he's laid out, and um, I can't see any ways in which Trump looks likely to make anything better, and a whole lot of ways in which I fear that he might actually make things worse. For example, I'm reading these days about Ukraine, and I don't know the overall score on the scoreboard. I know the Russians have been making advances, and I feel bad about the things that didn't keep on going the way they look like they would 2022, and they're advancing. Okay, but I've been reading some stuff on Daily Kos about how the Russians are getting clobbered in certain respects, and I don't know what the balance is between the advances in the Donetsk, what thing is called. And on the other hand, though the Russians are advancing there, slowly but surely or something, the Ukrainians are hitting a bunch of targets with drones, and the Russians are playing a non-trivial price, and the Russians and North Koreans are actually not doing at all well in their attempt to turn back how the Ukrainians have seized Kursk, a part of Russia itself, while the Russians occupy part of Ukraine. Like maybe someday there could be a trade. I don't know where these things are. But, on every division, I don't see Trump doing something that will make things better. I hope the Europeans can step up and do what needs to be done to help the Ukrainians make it. I don't know where things are headed with the war in Ukraine. Making Putin fail would be a huge victory for the same side that Kamala Harris represented in this other arena. And, Trump's victory is probably a victory for Putin. I'd love to be wrong. And climate change, same way. There's, I don't know how much is at stake in terms of what the American government does about climate change, whether it's going to be the kind of denialism that led Trump to withdraw from the Paris Treaty in, I guess, 2018, or whether it's the let's do something meaningful and palatable too, that Biden did in the Inflation Reduction Act. I don't know how big a difference American leadership, but I imagine it matters a fair amount. And if Kamala Harris had been elected, we'd be moving more in that direction. And when it comes to good, this fascist Trumpian force is likely to make for real suffering, an additional increment of suffering for our children and grandchildren. The good is about human beings and other creatures for whom there's a better and a worse, feeling better rather than worse. The more we have not just a climate crisis, but a climate catastrophe, the more misery, the less fulfillment, the more feeling bad, the less feeling good there will be in this collective world. So human beings have got a lot of good impulses. Saving dogs that are abandoned in a hurricane, giving money to kids in third world countries to help them with a cleft lip. Kind of a shame if we can't have a government that represents those kinds of impulses more, and the kind of impulses that Vladimir Putin or Donald Trump embodies. I could name some other fascistic types that are too much of a part of the world scene as fascism has been gaining over democracy. So Trump gets away with it because of all those things. The court, I think I listed four. A fifth one might be the media. The media have had difficulty covering Trump. And I'm not positive I would know how they should do it at this point. But I did, back when W was president, I did write, and I had a website that you can find on my website, a portal into an archive, None So Blind. I wrote something called The Dog That Didn't Bite. Didn't bark, I mean. It's a reference to a Sherlock Holmes. The American press, when George W. Bush was president, failed to bark. And by bark, I mean, I thought it was clear that one of the biggest stories in American history was being enacted with the Bush administration. There was a degree of sociopathy that ran that administration. And I don't fully understand how all the dynamics played among George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and Karl Rove. But that triumvirate, one way or another, was quite visibly assaulting fundamental aspects of the nature of the American system. It was obvious to me anyway. I was appalled at the time, but now it looks rather benign compared to what we've seen since. In a way, I'm a little bit like a Cassandra that I saw this thing coming, but there's so much that happened that, like Trump getting away with everything, or almost everything, that I never would have thought possible. Parts of my mind have been just stuck in the idea that I understand who America is. I've put into a piece a line from the Beatles. I thought I knew you. What did I know? So I saw things coming, but also got taken by surprise. So the press failed to cover what I thought was, I think, one of the three biggest stories in American history. Obviously, one of them would be the coming and the actuality of the Civil War. And maybe the other one would be the story of, basically the FDR years of dealing with the Great Depression and then dealing with the global conflict against the forces of fascism in Germany and Japan. And then there is what I saw happening in America at that time, which I only partially recall, and I'm not going to try to summon it up, but it could be shown, because I showed it on my website, it could be shown that we were in a very dangerous moment. The press wasn't telling the American people essentially what the heart of what was going on was. And it was at that time that I made my first main foray into trying to understand evil, defined as a force. I didn't yet define it as a force, a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse. It took me a decade to get to that. I'm not sure if I do define it in the piece, but the piece is called The Concept of Evil. Why it is intellectually valid. That's important for me because I understand the philosophical arguments of 20th century relativism and don't regard it as real. That there is a coherent force that consistently works to make things worse. And that is a good definition of evil. And that force is real, important, and I think I can prove life-serving. So That's what we're needing to see and to fight for what it is. And so it's showing that is part of summoning force from liberal America, from the American people, the political consciousness such that you see that what's rising on the right must be repudiated, which became clear, I think, in the 1990s when Clinton was president, because what they tried to do to simply not accept that the people had chosen Clinton to be president was not American. It was un-American. It was contrary to our rules. We respect the right of the people to hire whom they want, and we respect that they will play the role of president. They haven't done, the Republican Party hasn't done that since Jimmy Carter took office in 1977. Didn't do it with Clinton, didn't do it with Obama, didn't do it with Biden. But that was never something they paid a price for. And the press didn't make them pay a price for it either. It's not legitimate to make the president's failure your top priority. It's not enough to just report that that's what it was. You got to help people understand what they're looking at. And the press failed at that. This was a national emergency of what the Bush administration was doing to the country. It lied us into a war. It handed down a torture memo. It deliberately cultivated division for its own political purposes when the country had unified behind it. Because that's what we do in the face of an attack by an enemy. This was a political administration of gangsterism. And we've forgotten it. And the press didn't help people see it. And the Democratic Party didn't help people see it. And that contributes to the whole situation in which the Republican Party becomes a party to acquit this criminal who had done these impeachable things, in which the Republican base, nobody fought for their hearts and minds because of the feelings of the audience of Rush Limbaugh is not our concern. Where liberal America doesn't see what is rising on the right, what's taking over. Not something which is as decent as even Ronald Reagan, who was somewhat, extreme in some ways, but still he was the kind of guy who could go to Reykjavik and start wanting to make peace. There's something quite significant about the way he, contrary to, say, I think it was Dick Cheney and Cap Weinberger, didn't want to go down the path of peace when Gorbachev opened it up. The Republican Party under Ronald Reagan had certain brokenness in it, but the ruling spirit then and into the first Bush, through the first Bush presidency, was basically decent. But that was soon to change. And the press, I don't know how the press should have covered the campaign. I think the press had a job to help people understand what's true and what's not true, and to call attention to the fact that just about everything that was getting said on the right was either not true or it was some other form of ugly. And Kamala Harris, like I said, I think she did a good job of making a stark contrast that I thought would be good enough, because I thought the American people overwhelmingly would choose the good over the whole over the broken, but they didn't. So it makes me wonder whether the transformation that we need in liberal culture is still what it was. That Kamala Harris, consistent with the ways of liberalism throughout this time, did not press the battle as though she was good fighting evil. She just said, "Hey, America, let me show you the good. Let me show you my heart, which is committed to the good. You can elect me, and I will serve you, and I will serve these things that are good that you value." Maybe the American people are in some senses right now beyond redemption. Maybe they've got to be like the Jimmy Stewart character in It's a Wonderful Life, and be dragged through the other America like he was. The Jimmy Stewart character was dragged through Pottsville or Potterstown or something. It is the world that greed and mean spirited made. That's what was required for Jimmy Stewart to have a change of heart. Well, that movie dramatizes a contrast. This is a new idea. I've used this Bedford Falls, Pottersville dichotomy since I did a series called Press the Battle. I think it shows a lot about our dilemma, our crisis in America. But this is the first time that I've seen how maybe it relates to how we deal right now. That maybe the American people have just made a choice that they were not able to respond appropriately to. My hope is that we are at least decent enough as a people that if we knew the truth, we would come down on the side of the good. I'm not positive that that's the case, but I would like to think that that's the main thing that went wrong, at least with a big chunk of the people. Too many people maybe are attracted to evil, but you know, I'd like to think that if they knew what was truth, but maybe not. But if that is the case, perhaps what might have worked for Kamala Harris or somebody in that position would have been to run a race more like FDR would have run, or let's just say filled with a moral inspiration that is filled with a feeling that gets conveyed to the people of these malefactors of great wealth. Or, Biden just gave a speech in which he talked about the techno-industrial complex and that we are in danger of being taken over by an oligarchy. And what's his name? 10 o'clock on MSNBC. O'Donnell, Lawrence O'Donnell, yesterday was talking about the perhaps what's called for now is what I've been calling for all along, and which I didn't think was necessary for Kamala because she was doing such a good job. And maybe it's really calling out the evil so that people experience it as evil, that they didn't pick up really what was at stake because they weren't hit over the head with the darkness. And maybe people have now got to be dragged through the darkness, meaning to be taken by the angel and shown what America has become with this fascist force, to show it in ways that capture the reality that I anticipate, which is that at every juncture, when you look at what this group does, it makes the human world worse. It makes things more broken. It shows that it is being governed by a coherent force that consistently makes the human world worse. It shows that we are without having to use the word. We are fighting against an evil. I do believe that most Americans still can respond to the battle between good and evil by siding with the good. And in any event, that looks to me really like the path forward to do it. That if Trump does something with if he nominates somebody for Director of National Intelligence, or an anti-vaxxer, or an attorney general who's not willing to say what the outcome of a free and fair election was, and she's going to take an oath to defend the Constitution when the rule of law declared that Joe Biden won that election. She's already violating that oath. Point out at each juncture the larger picture of what's broken and what's whole. And you don't have to use the word evil. People will see it. Just as they see it when the angel drags Jimmy Stewart through this dark, unhappy, mean-spirited Pottersville. What Jimmy Stewart discovered is he made a difference. His sacrifices were worthwhile, that he had an impact that made things better. What we need right now is for a substantial American majority to recognize that this is not the path we want to go down. This fascistic, plutocratic, ugly thing that Trump and his minions are doing. This is not what we want. And to build up a popular feeling of let's take a different course. I guess I'll stop there. I do feel good to have shared all this because for me, there's an integrated picture here. And I've, just made a variety of connections, but it puts me in touch with how the world that we're living in is really a mind-bogglingly whole and dramatic place. And at the center of the human drama, there is a battle between two coherent forces. And I can show how those forces are manifest and how they are a coherent force, which is a whole other thing, which I develop on my website about basically looking at how it causes and effects and seeing the coherence. But there's a coherent force that consistently, there are two coherent forces. And this is an inevitable result of a species getting smart enough to do what we did. Any species that did that would be embarked on a historical course in which there would be a battle at the center of its drama that's reasonable to call a battle between good and evil. That somehow it's actually built into the dynamics that emerge with this one species taking this unprecedented step. And once you understand that that's really the nature of the challenge that you face, that social evolution for a civilization creating species is inevitably going to be filled with this kind of difficulty about, are you going to get your civilization in order soon enough and well enough to live on that planet for the long haul? Or are you going to fail to get control of the destructive force you inevitably unleashed? Fail to create a good enough order, well enough and soon enough, and end up destroying yourself. And you look at our particular point in history right now. We are within the century where we discover that we actually might destroy ourselves, that human civilization is something that gets more and more powerful, and that combined with the disorder that we haven't overcome means that we might destroy ourselves in a nuclear war, nuclear holocaust, or destroy ourselves by becoming so huge a bull in the biospheric china shop that we bring the whole system of life that we depend on for our survival down upon us. Those are both plausible scenarios as far as any understanding I have. And it would be helpful to be able to see ourselves in terms of that big picture where, okay, evolution eventually creates, and I argue that elsewhere, I haven't published it yet, I argue that it is inevitable that once that life will emerge on many planets, in every case, you'll end up with a creature that's smart enough to eventually start to becoming a cultural animal, and that will eventually lead to becoming a civilization-creating animal, and then you have all the repercussions that that book talks about, and that I've been deriving ever since. So we have a kind of a course that probably has been enacted in various planets around various stars and various galaxies around the universe. And it's probably been enacted and I sort of speculate, well, how many times does a species whose civilization is going to get progressively more powerful and therefore eventually capable of destroying itself, how many times does it get its act together before it destroys itself? And I think about that. And I think about what are our odds right now. I've been saying that I think it's a toss-up. I've been saying that for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. But the defeat, the victory of Donald Trump, I don't know, if it was a toss-up back then, the tipping point has moved in the wrong direction now. But I think it's useful to understand that there's been some kind of inevitability about this challenge, and to see our position at this point after 10 or 12,000 years, we've gotten to the point where the question of getting our act together or destroying ourselves is becoming visible, has become visible. And it is pretty clear that if we don't get our act together a lot better, I have an argument about the inevitability of a nuclear holocaust if we don't change anything about the way the world is organized. I talk about it in terms of Russian roulette. You can't keep firing in Russian roulette without knowing what the eventually is going to happen. So I think that if we don't change the world from the way it's organized with Putin able to do what he's doing to Ukraine and making that decision, one guy, if we're always going to be at the mercy of somebody like Putin to upset the world, to put it at war, I think eventually things are going to go wrong. Historians think they could have gone wrong at the Cuban Missile Crisis. Could have happened then. It's like firing eventually. So I think that the big picture helps us clarify where we are. Where we are is a place where we apparently could go either way. I mean, but it's becoming harder for me to imagine than it used to be that we'll actually get it together. But I haven't given up on it. What do I know about how history might take unexpected moves? But this is a whole lot worse than what I was envisioning when I was first calling it a toss-up. eventually, this is the challenge that a civilization creating species must take. And it helps to understand why that arises, that there's some inevitabilities, there are some coherent forces, and they clarify what it is you need to do if you're going to be a civilization creating species, if your civilization is going to get powerful enough. There are things you got to do, or you'll end up destroying yourself. I care a lot about what's at stake here. Everything that my family culture taught me to care about justice, which democracy gives and fascism doesn't. Democracy is power from the ground up, the will of the people, the consent of the governed, a constitutional process whereby the people make a choice. And fascism, which is about power being applied from the top down, where the people who wield the power from the top are able to compel all those at the bottom to serve them. Fundamental difference. Something that human civilization has been wrestling with forever. From the very beginnings. The ways of tyranny naturally emerge. To get to democracy, civilization has got to create orders to substitute for the natural order from which we extricated ourselves. It ain't the same order exactly. The natural order that evolves biologically isn't a democracy, but neither does any single actor dominate it. Power has become a new thing because humans develop the range of potential behavior that can disrupt the order of things in destructive ways. Whereas the lion will be a lion. He'll kill zebras, he'll kill wildebeest, stuff like that. But that whole pattern of interaction emerged over millions and millions of years because it worked. It worked in the biological evolution sense of things, in which the lion and the zebra and the grass work together to create a perpetual motion machine, even as they devour each other. But civilized societies exist outside of that order. That's what happens when you extricate yourself from the niche in which you evolved biologically. So there is a selective process for ways of power that people wouldn't have chosen if they'd been free to choose. But the systemic dynamic that emerges because of human creativity also mandates that the world is going to be shaped not by human nature itself, but by the spirit of the gangster, which is what prevails in the inevitable war against all against all. So it becomes clear, the only way to stop playing Russian roulette in this situation is to end the anarchy. I don't know how we get from here to there. I'm not even all that clear about what the there is like. But we really need to focus a lot of attention on figuring out what the there is, and then asking ourselves a second question. What steps can we take now that would be wise to take and that are most promising of getting us eventually to that destination that we need to get to? I think those two questions are two that we don't pay enough attention to, and that this Better Human story that I wish I could give you an easy way to get to, but go to a betterhumanstory.org and then click on whatever it is, advanced or something, it'll take you there. That this civilization of ours which has just lost a really important battle in this election, needs to get a better order. And it needs to conceive, where might we try to get to? That can be an ongoing discussion. And it's got to be asking, if whatever it is that we've said, well, this is the direction we got to go, what steps can we take now that are wise to take that would help us get there eventually? Because we don't have forever to get there. We're not going to probably, I don't think we're going to back into a successful future. You know, we got to have some intentionality. And I do think that this integrative vision of what happened to human species is a good one for calling attention to where we are in this whole evolutionary scheme that many other species have probably had to contend with. And I do wonder how many of them made it and how many of them blew it. I've got a thing on my, if you don't, you can also, you can Google also my last name, Schmuckler, and the fate of civilization. Because on another website, Three Quarks Daily, I have something about how to think about where are we going as a civilization. And it fantasizes about a guy who does a social scientific study of what differentiates those societies that survive for the long haul and those that blow it before they can get their act together. And what I really would like to see that study done, but obviously we won't. But I conjecture that one thing that you could probably say about the societies that make it is that they were paying attention to the challenge that they faced sooner rather than later. And that they were asking questions about where do they have to get to and what steps do they need to take it sooner rather than later. And they were doing a better job of understanding the big picture of the human drama, of which all these things, Ukraine and the 2024 election, are battles in a larger situation that humankind has faced as the inevitable result of being the civilization creating creature. The better we see what we're called upon to do, the better we'll do it. And everything is at stake. Thank you. That's kind of who I am. I hope that's worth following around in. There's a lot to see, and it's a very dramatic and meaningful picture, but it's not a very happy picture right now. I get a lot of spiritual pleasure from looking at the wholeness of this thing that we're engaged in. But I feel a lot of emotional pain to see which direction things are going. Thanks. Bye-bye. I'm Andy Schmuckler. My poor website is called betterhumanstory.org. And I've got a YouTube channel. If you would subscribe to, that would encourage me, who needs to be applauded now and then, because that's what my family culture taught me love was. Thanks. Bye-bye.